of the BWQC with the Missisquoi River Basin Association, she, her pronouns, and I am a voting member, which I didn't put in my name. I'm just gonna hop it. I'll call on Sarah Gratz.
I am Sarah. I'm an Eco AmeriCorps serving at the Northwest Regional Planning Commission. Do you want me to pass it off?
I'll just do it if I think I can stay on top of it. So Dan.
Richford representative.
Hi. Kent.
Good morning. Kent Henderson, Friends of Northern Lake Champlain. My alternate is attending the LCBP State of the Lake meeting that we found out about with pretty short notice. So we are conquering and dividing today.
Great. Lauren.
Lauren Weston, District Manager for the Franklin County Conservation District, voting member, and I use she, her pronouns.
David.
Yeah, Dave Allerton with the Department of Public Works in St. Albans Town.
Barry.
Barry Lamke, Northwest Regional Planning Commission. And can you pass around those Chips Ahoy's there, Lindsay?
Sorry, actually, they're very stale. I just pulled them out of our cupboard and was like, "Ooh, I think these have been in here a couple months." So wish I could.
That's okay.
Beth.
Torpy, NBDA, voting member.
Jim.
Jim Pease. Well, I'm formerly Vermont DC, retired. I'm trying to turn off my AI and I don't know how to do that. So I'll, if I can turn it off, I will.
Okay, no worries.
And Jim, I can try to remove it if that might help.
Yeah, remove it, please. I mean,
And then Dean, you're the only one left to intro. If you can.
Okay, well, the Impure staff. And apologies if someone has informed me that they would not be here. I may have a chance to steal a glance at my emails to address people like Alaire, who I have heard from about other things, and Ted. But they may just be running late.
Right. Great. I'm just going to remind everyone meeting protocols. Please, if at all possible, keep your camera on. Please identify yourself when you're speaking just for the recording's sake. If you're a voting member, you can vote either by raising your physical hand or putting the hand raise function. I feel like I'm forgetting some, but be kind. General. Julia, do you want to introduce yourself real quick? We did intros.
Hi, yeah, sorry I'm late. I thought my PayPal was getting hacked, but it might not be. I'm Julia Crocker. I'm the coordinator for the Franklin Watershed Committee. Yes, sorry about that.
No worries. Thanks for joining us. And Chris, I see you've just joined. Do you want to do a quick intro? We're just wrapping up those.
Hey, yeah, I just saw the meeting on the calendar and I had a free block and probably just here for 20 minutes. And I saw that you have a cool application on the books for today, so really excited about that. I work with DEC and work with the QUIS behind the scenes, and appreciate all the work you're doing here in your basin to help improve water quality. So just I'll be lurking in the background. Good to see everybody. Thanks for having me.
Thanks, Chris. Next up is declaration of conflict of interest. So please declare if you have conflict of interest with agenda items, and I'm sure we have one today. Lauren.
I have a project to be reviewed today, so I will not vote during that.
Great. Any less obvious conflicts of interest that anyone needs to declare today?
I did mention the last time I was on that I am working for Watershed Consulting in the Upper Missisquoi in the Sutton River watershed.
Thanks, Jim. we'll seek a motion to approve or adjust the agenda. Well, we'll take any adjustments to the agenda as laid out, or we'll seek a motion to approve. Kent?
I'm willing to make a motion to approve the agenda as presented.
Great, that's a motion from Kent. Is there a second?
I'll second it.
Thank you, Dan. Second, all in favor of approving the agenda as sent out by Dean? I see Lindsay, Dan, Kent, Lauren, David, Barry, Beth, Jim, Julia, yay. Motion or agenda is approved. Next is the minutes from the last meeting, which were in the packet that Dean sent out. Hopefully folks got a chance to read over them. And I'll seek a motion to approve unless there are clarifications that need to be made.
Move that we approve the meeting of the minutes as presented.
Okay, that's a motion from Dan. Is there a second?
I'll just note that I'm abstaining because I was not at that meeting. This is Lauren.
Thank you, Lauren. Is there a second to Dan's motion to approve? Looks like Beth is seconding. All right, we have one abstention from Lauren because she was not at that meeting. Otherwise, all in favor, please indicate so. Got Lindsay, Dan, Kent, David, Barry, Beth, Jim. All right. And we do have Sarah Downs joining us. Hi, Sarah. We missed the introduction, so you want to just give your quick hello?
Sarah Downs from Enosburg, and I've just been doing water quality with the elementary school kids here in Enosburg, so that's why I'm late.
That's a fantastic excuse. Thanks, Sarah. All right, we just approved the minutes from the last meeting. Next up is public comment on items not related, or sorry, yeah. Public comment not related to items on the agenda. Anyone have anything new or pressing they want to bring forth? Hearing none, I'm going to move on. I don't believe we have any seating of new reps or alternates. If I'm mistaken, speak now.
You're correct.
Okay, so moving on from that. Budget adjustment requests, as Dean had written in the packet, none have come forth at this time. So I think we can move right on from that to get to the excitement of the day, Lauren's application.
If I could just do a quick tee up for Lauren, and Lauren, I will try to give you the ability to share momentarily. There was a note in the packet along with a application at a glance table, and then all of the materials. And then it ended with a recommendation to approve the project. The at a glance essentially extracts information that's submitted from the application form that people use to make their applications, and the request is on the order of $57,000 in QUISP funds for a floodstream restoration project that would be performed on behalf of Franklin County NRCD. I think people may have had a chance to see the calculations in this table. It has great phosphorus reduction benefits, and therefore it has a great cost per kilogram or cost effectiveness on the order of about $3,000 if we look at the midpoint. So that's the basis for the recommendation that you approve it. But I don't want to get ahead of myself too much. I'll turn things over to Lauren. But when she's done, essentially the question before the group will be, does the project, is it deserving of funding? So I will stop my sharing and let you share if you would like, Lauren.
Hi, folks. We are looking to do a 30% design to understand what should be happening in this stretch of stream in Enosburg. It's two different landowners. They're both very excited to do this project. It was actually a project handed off from the Vermont Rivers Conservancy. They had gotten started but Vermont Rivers Conservancy has changed their priorities and are no longer prioritizing the Missisquoi. So they passed this project off to us, and we consulted with MRBA because it's also kind of their area. And I know Sarah Downs has also been involved in this project a little bit, which is concern around the erosion happening at the cemetery. It's a pretty straightforward, we're gonna get some data collection, do some modeling, and figure out what the best alternatives are here to restore the floodplain and stream connection. Yes, Lindsay.
Wasn't it passed off from Trout Unlimited, not River Conservancy? That was my understanding on the site visit, but I may be mistaken. And it doesn't really.
I mess up errands constantly, so I think that's what I did. Yes.
Yeah. Yeah, it was
That's
Aaron
not
Rodgers, not
confusing.
DeVries.
Sorry. There's a couple things going on in my head these days.
Understandable. Thank you.
Yeah. And the costs that we have are based on quotes we received from qualified folks, not quotes, but estimates in the pre-round. So with a little bit of a buffer in case costs go up, as they seem to be doing. I don't have a whole lot here. It's a stream restoration project that we'd like to get going. Yeah, Dean. Oh, Dean, you're muted.
Yeah, sorry about that. I know I've contradicted myself in the meeting materials, but I'm also seeing final on the screening form, and I'm seeing preliminary, and you just said preliminary. And so could you just establish for the record, this is for preliminary and not for final, even though that's what the screening form says?
Yes, apologies. This is for preliminary.
Okay, and my apologies to the group because I had put it both ways. So sorry about that.
Jim.
I was just wondering, Lauren, if this is going to involve tree planting at all, or is that to be determined?
The hope is actually during this 30% design that we'll find out what areas we're not touching as part of lowering or big yellow machines. And so our goal is to do some tree planting ideally as soon as possible, even without final design in those sections, and then would also incorporate tree planting once the area has been excavated and stabilized.
Okay.
Any other? Yeah, Kent.
There, I got on audio. So I've probably driven by this site 1,000
Yes.
times, but I don't see road signs. So could you kind of direct me as to that offside road? Where is the project?
Yes, it drops in right across from Lindsay or Sarah. If you have an exact location right off the top of your tongue, I'll let you take that one.
Well,
It
Kent,
is-
you know where
It's
Terry,
right off of Chester Arthur Road, right across from that. It'd be at one of Matt Hull's hayfields
Okay.
that comes out right at the bottom of our road.
Yeah.
Thank you
Okay.
both.
yeah, and if you know where Terry Magnan's car shop event space is, it's Terry's, then the cemetery, and then this spot.
Okay. That's what I thought. I just wanted to be sure that's what we were talking about. I'm in a really strong support of this project. In another basin, my organization has got 100% design, and but we have got a lot of gaps that we've got to fill in before we can go to implementation. So I've got some questions, and this is as much for Chris. I don't see Chris there here now. Did Chris leave?
So here, this camera's off.
I am just behind the scenes.
All right. So I'm just going to bring up some of the problems that we've had, or the things we've got to overcome with our project of a similar nature. There's the one I'm talking about. It's a stream going by a municipal road in that case, And we worked with our engineer firm. We came up with really strong phosphorus reduction numbers, as you have in this one, in this project. And there's been a big change in that since we started the project. It's really changed our cost effectiveness, and it's, you know, that it may put us in jeopardy of not being able to, you know, go ahead with quist funding on the project for that reason. So that's going to be one of my questions is how did you come up with the phosphorus loss prediction, and do we think it is something that DEC will stick with, you know, right through to when you're ready to implement?
I won't comment on if DEC is going to stick with it, but we just use we did not use the FFI, we used the reduction calculator tool.
Yep. Okay. Yep, been there, done that. I'm also wondering, as close as it is to the traveled area, about are there concerns with, are you close enough to that state highway that you are close to the right of way for the state?
Yes, we're going to be close.
Okay. We just completed a project in the state right away. So I really hope, I mean, I'm hoping that this is approved and you move ahead, and I will might have some advice for you as you go ahead with that part.
Appreciated.
Another thing that we have struggled with is when do we address the getting funding to do the historical assessment, or determining if a historical assessment is done. We're being told that needs to be done prior to going to implementation. And I was wondering if that is something that had been considered, or if this area may actually be exempted from a historical assessment.
We assume that we will need to do historical assessment. We did budget funds for that during this phase of preliminary design. We would not get that started necessarily until we have a better understanding of what the footprint of the work might be. So that might be a little bit of a phased process within this 30% design.
Okay. And then this is my last question, I promise. And I could see it was near agricultural lands. And likewise, we've got projects that are in that vicinity. And so, you know, we've talked about this in the council last spring about when to interact with the ag agency and what's happening on these farms. And I would assume Matt would be a small farm. But I think is that the only operating farm in the vicinity?
I don't know about that, if he's the only farm in the vicinity, but technically he doesn't own this land. It's owned by private other landowners. So I do think that has some impact. And they have expressed willingness to take some land out of production, and they would have that conversation with Matt.
Okay. All right. Well, I mean, that's okay. Well, I'm not the regulator. So I don't have the answer for that, but I know that I'm being really careful and including the ag agency in my discussions. And before I get too far into things, we're going to be working on the Rock River, and there's going to be a lot of interaction there because there are middle-sized farms there, as well as small farms. So we'll be working on that aspect together, I think, probably moving ahead.
Jim, I'll call on you in 1 second, but I guess I have a general question to Dean, I suppose. My understanding is as long as it's not an agronomic or RAP related practice, it's a natural resources practice, that it's kind of good to go.
Yeah, that meshes with my understanding that a natural resource practice can be eligible for QIS funds, but you have to, you run through the agency using their screening forms to get their signature on it. But yes, there is a memo that was written years ago that essentially creates the opportunity for a percentage of our funds to go to agriculture or go to agricultural properties, but for non-agronomic related practices. And if you've got reason to believe that it would get the agency's sign off, just understand that you would need to get the agency's sign off using their screening tool.
Do I need that right now, or do I need that before implementation? Because we did not go through the agency of ag at all.
I think you would want to do it, now. I mean, as soon as you can.
Jim.
Lauren, I was curious. It says that the bridge is slightly destabilized and potentially creating a cinch point. Has there been any analysis of the hydraulic capacity of the bridge and what, how undersized it is?
There's been no analysis done, and it will be part of our model. It's definitely undersized. Okay.
And there's no existing data that the state's collected already, an RGA or, there's no existing data you couldn't just access. I mean, that might save some money if you could get it.
What's an RGA?
Well, a geomorphic assessment of
Okay.
this, they do of reaches of the river. I don't know if you've talked to, who's the river's contact in that area? Is it Stacy?
Yep. Yeah,
So
Stacy
Stacy would know
approved
whether
this.
there was any existing geomorphic data for the bridge crossings, the culverts in that watershed, that part of the watershed.
We have not asked her that question, but I would imagine the engineer would do a review of.
Yeah, okay, all right. So, I mean, it just seems like it would be more difficult to create more difficult, more expensive to create a new crossing rather than just simply enlarge the existing one. And if you knew, I guess you'll get to this, so there's no point.
Yeah. Thanks. And Karen, your hand went up and then went down.
Yes. So I wanted to say that I was curious. I know that Stacy was like, yeah, it's a great concept. And I agree that we want to find floodplain enhancement, and that would be a good first step, is to look at opportunities. I mean, she didn't mention there is a phase 1 for this area at least. And there's a project identified that may be in the River Corridor report for the branch here. And so I would hope that recommend that in your RFP or contract with the engineers that they would be looking at that phase 1 and updating it, because I think that information would be needed to then develop the FFI calculation. And maybe that's just something that you would work with Stacy with to understand what sort of SGA processes that we already have would be expected for the contractor, and the information they need to collect to be able to then use the FFI tool to figure out floodplain capacity. And I came in late. I'm hoping this wasn't covered, but I also, make sure, because I think Clean Water Fund policy description for floodplain enhancement of this work it doesn't support stabilization.
Right.
Does it?
No, when I said stabilization, it was just stabilization once we excavate, making sure that area is not highly erosive.
Okay, all right, because you have one.
Something unstable.
right. So, yeah, because there was on the map, there's an area where the landowner has expected that there could be some he'd like to stabilize the outer loop. And so I think that has to be clear that wouldn't be something done with these funds to design that, or
Right.
And hopefully, I think what you did say, which was really good, which made sense, is you're basically developing a design that's going to reduce the erosive force. And so hopefully.
Yeah, Dean.
Yeah, just quickly touching back on the ag agency review. The reason this didn't trigger anything with me is that the button or the checkbox that was selected was submitted or pending. I'm thinking you must have things ready to go to them, or that it at least won't be long to go to them, so that we can get this determined.
I will have to double check with Mel. She had been working on that piece, so I'm not entirely sure where that stands, but I can double check with her.
Okay.
Oh, and I wanted to add on to that. I think from what I've understood from ag, they do want to see potential buffer plantings, because they want to make sure that the landowner understands that there could be a CREP license.
I guess I have like this bigger picture question. Like, every single bit of land in Franklin County is farmland. So it sounds like every project basically is going to have to go through Agency of Ag.
Yeah, and it should be pretty quick.
Okay.
So just, and I think over time we should be pulling together their answers so that we could do a decision tree maybe.
Okay.
Though, so that or they would do one once they get enough questions.
Gotcha. Yeah, it is a significant shift from before.
And even with the design, so even if you do say there should be buffer plantings in this area, it may end up being paid for through a CREP. But we still need to know where that would be. So.
Thanks, everybody.
Okay, any other thoughts or questions or concerns about this before we move to Kent?
If you are looking for a motion to approve this project, I so move.
Okay, we have a motion to approve this project. Is there a second?
Yeah, I'll second it.
I've got a second from Dan. All in favor of the BWQC approving this 30% design project for Franklin County Conservation District? Wait, is there a recusal?
I'm recusing myself, Lauren Weston.
You're recusing, and Sarah? Sarah, are you recusing because of your involvement, or you're on mute?
Yes, because I was involved in bringing it forward, and it's definitely involved.
Okay, so we've got a recusal from Lauren, a recusal from Sarah. We've got a motion on the floor from Kent, seconded by Dan. So with note of those recusals, all in favor of approving this project to move forward 30% design, please indicate. Got Beth, Lindsay, Dan, Kent, Barry, Dave. Great. Thank you, guys.
And I'll just interject and note for the record, Sarah's alternate Dave was able to vote, so his vote will count. And Lauren's alternate would have been Mel, but she would have had to recuse herself anyway. So anyway.
Thanks for that clarification, Dean. Appreciate that. All right. I've actually lost my thread in the packet. Moving around to look at things. So there we go. Thank you. Increase in project development funding. So Dean, I'm gonna let you drive this one.
Yeah, I will get things started, and I imagine there could be some discussion. This agenda item was included on the agenda, partly in response to some recent communications from DEC, but it's a topic that's been kicking around for a while. There was a staff note, there was a copy of an email from Chris, so the author of that email, Chris, I think, is still here. And then some resource documents that provide some of the background for this. I just wanted to get things rolling by saying a few things. So if you've seen the materials, you know that DEC is indicating that more funds will be available that do not have an obligation to reduce phosphorus. So it's basically money that there's more flexibility, or at least no worry that, oh, this has to go immediately to reducing phosphorus. So more funding will be available for the type of work called project development. Project development funds might be a way that will help sustain partner organizations that do a lot of this work. Partner organizations, financing is always an issue, or usually is an issue for them to do the work. So my comments are on that, on top of that, and they include that project development has been an activity that's been eligible from the start, but not used extensively. People have been suggesting to the EC that they expand capacity support, not just expand support for project development, but to expand support for capacity, and DEC is doing that some through a grant program that many of you are probably aware of, that is going through Watersheds United Vermont. So there's that. There have been some discussions internal to the Regional Planning Commission office, amongst partner organizations within the Missisquoi Basin. But there are some concerns that if this is a solution, maybe it is a solution, maybe it's not a solution, or maybe that's not the only solution. And I make the comment that, there are still a lot of lines, and some of those lines are fuzzy. But I can tell you that as a staff for the Clean Water Service Provider, and someone whose job it is to support the Basin Council and the partners, we're going to try to do something as part of an initiative to use increased project development funds. I'm just going to walk through a little bit the numbers. How much funding are we talking about? We're talking about quite a bit. So again, just to remind people, money is allocated by a formula to each basin. The Missisquoi Basin gets a number. Let's just say in round numbers, it's $2 million, and there's part of that is split off for program administration, and then what's left is for projects. But of that's for projects, some of it is carved off, and it's for these exploratory efforts that don't have a phosphorus target number associated with them. That number in the past has been 7%. So if you look at the first couple of years of funding for the Missisquoi Basin, one year it was about $135,000. The next year, which we haven't even gotten close to tapping, it's $200,000. Year three, again, at this historic rate of 7%, it would be another roughly $140,000. The proposal that's being mentioned is that year three funding for project development would actually go from 7% to 28% in a way to kind of catch up the previous years. And basically the idea is that, instead of 7% of the total amount of project money that's available that doesn't have a phosphorus target with it, it should be more like 14%. And so 28% in year 3 will help us catch up. Long story short is, though, that means potentially money available for project development in year 3 would be about $678,000. So it's quite a bit of funding that we are talking about if there is the appetite to use it. There are a lot of different questions that have been raised. I've had conversations with Lindsay, and like I said earlier, with other partner organizations, some of whom are here. And those questions touch on everything from like, how much funding would it take for a partner organization to fund a position? Do they even want to fund a position to just do project development? Would that be compatible with their mission? Do the organizations think it would be better to go after big chunks of money for project development, or is it really better to do it in small chunks? Anyway, there are a long list of questions. We can revisit them, or we can talk about them more, but I think it would be better to just respond to people, or let people today respond with their own questions or thoughts, and then see where it takes us. Like I said, as a QUISP, we are working on a response. And, you know, when this first happened, one idea was, okay, maybe a special funding round that is focused specifically on this. Now, the next scheduled round for applications is August, so maybe that timing works. Maybe it works well. So we wouldn't need to schedule a special funding round. Another idea would be that partner organizations put together a joint proposal and share a position. That's one idea. Another idea that is not directly related to this, but it's just getting to the idea of having the Basin Council approve blocks of money for things, could be that we try to direct more money for cultural resource assessment and make that available more flexibly. But anyway, I'm just going to stop talking there now. I think maybe, Lindsay, since you and I've had some discussions, you might want to take the lead, or at least facilitate the discussion from here on in. There's no specific action that I'm requesting, unless somebody identifies one. Because, as I've said, the conversations with partner organizations and the bases have started, and they are going to continue.
Great, thanks, Dean. Any initial reactions from folks here? I had a pretty strong initial reaction, but I don't want to put words in anyone's mouth, so. No. I had suspected, and thank you for confirming, Dean, that we haven't used much of our project development. And I guess I want to ask the folks on screen what they think a barrier has been. Why haven't we used those dollars that have been available? I don't know.
I'll chime in.
Thanks, Lauren.
I think bringing any project through this process is incredibly daunting. And at project development, it's almost like, yes, I'm committing to bringing a project through this. I think that's one piece. So I think there's limited folks in this room and beyond who feel they could even bring a project forward. Additionally, you know, QUISP projects are one of 50 things that my staff do. And so even if we had the money, we have priorities elsewhere. I think there's been some long-term confusion and frustration about what projects are even going to be fundable. You know, I think we've learned that stormwater doesn't seem fundable. And I think there are a lot of other, or at least there have been a lot of other grant opportunities that maybe folks are more familiar with and more comfortable with, and that are easier and less P focused, so they can be a more holistic project that we're using other dollars for. is my 2 cents. You know, I guess I'll be honest, I think 7 tree plantings this year, but I didn't bring any of them to the QUISP because they didn't fit in a nice timeline. And so I went with Trees for Streams funding. Yeah, discretion of the project manager, I guess.
Great, thanks. I do think, yeah, my experience has been similar. Some of the other available dollars are easier to navigate, particularly for tree planting, or more familiar for tree planting. Not that that's development. Dean?
Yeah, just clarifying something, Lauren, as far as stormwater projects, I think what you're implying is that they wouldn't, a more traditional stormwater project wouldn't be attractive because of its high costs and therefore low cost effectiveness. And since that's driving so much of what we do, it wouldn't be. I don't think you're saying that stormwater projects per se are excluded from eligibility. It's just that it's too darn hard to make the numbers work.
That is exactly what I am saying.
Yeah, it's not worth developing the project if you're not going to get a good P yield. Karen?
Hi, so I have a question about the stormwater projects, and I was actually chatting with Carolyn a bit about it. You know, and that in project development, is there an opportunity to just sit down and look at the basin, look at the villages that are high concentration of developed land or parks, and find ways to do stormwater treatment that's cheaper and not do it the traditional way? Maybe there's another type of practice that would work. If you've got lots of lawn, then can you just do a mowed depression instead of a fancy rain garden with plants that are so expensive? So that's one of my thoughts is, can we use project development money to help us think outside the box, you know, work with Jill, who works for Lake Champlain Sea Grant as their infrastructure, green infrastructure coordinator. Yeah, Lauren, you're the engineer. Tell us.
I think that's a fair question. I think the impact necessarily would be really small in terms of like what actual P levels you are reducing, just because of the footprint you could have on private property or others. I do think too the O&M agreement that folks need to sign, like people do not want to sign it. So I think that could be a barrier for lots of small projects too. That's a lot of people you have to convince to let DEC technically go on your property anytime.
Lauren, that actually was an issue with the Member Magog WIC as well. And I followed up with Chris and I just sent him an email, a reminder email, but it sounded, yeah, like they lost a big project in the Member Magog because of that. And it sounded like though the lawyers needed their pound of flesh, pardon the Shakespearean pun there.
Yeah, I've received that. I'll just jump in. I've received that feedback. I sympathize with the burden of that form in particular. And I have shared the concerns with the O&M team, with Gianna and Rachel. And, you know, there's just 1,700 other things that are being juggled, just like you, Lauren, have other priorities. There are other things going on. This is going to be addressed. I don't know when, and I don't know what the result will be, but there will be some more follow-up on the issue. And I'm hoping that the form can be changed personally. Appreciate the other bigger discussion though here on QUISP funding and those dynamics. So thanks for letting me be a fly on the wall for that.
Thanks for following through with that, Chris.
I just want to put my stamp of desire on that O&M being simplified as well. As someone that was sitting in on that group, it was very discouraging to make suggestions and just have them go nowhere. Make discussions from the standpoint of someone that actually interacts with landowners, and just be able to state, this isn't going to go, nobody's going to sign this. And now we're living that, because I understand that DEC needs to protect themselves, but it's not feasible, like Lauren said, for a number of small landowners. Like, sure, we can get large landowners or farm type scale projects underway, but a lawn, yeah, it's not going to go with the reels of paperwork that they have to sign. Kent.
Thank you. Yeah, this is a need that we foresaw 3 years ago, as the target formulations were being created and the percentages were being decided upon. You know, as a veteran water quality group that has been successful in bringing 80 projects to finish in the last 10 years, identifying the projects takes a lot of time and effort, and we have never been able to figure out how to be adequately compensated. The way we have done it is with fundraising. My organization has done it with fundraising outside of any governmental support. We like the idea of the independence, that we were able to make constructive criticism and not have any fear of any oversight with that criticism. But it's gotten to the point with salaries and what have you, that in order to address this need, we knew we needed added staff, and to my board's credit, they went ahead and they created a position, and we've made it a full-time position in full faith that we'll be able to work with this QIS funding. So, you know, this is very exciting news that we're actually going to get adequate funding in order to do these investigations now. Everybody sitting here that's done these projects knows it. You know, for every 4 landowners you speak to, you're going to be fortunate to get one that wants to work with you. And there's just a lot of hours that go into this that you never get an immediate response. Sometimes it may be 5 or 10 years down the road before somebody comes back to you, hey, I've got a great idea, and it's what you actually presented to them 5 or 10 years ago. So I'm happy to see this, and I can tell you that my staff, some of the most exciting work, some of the things that stimulate them the most, is going out to towns, going out to road foremen, going to select board members, and finding these projects, finding out, you know, what is the municipality, what are they interested in doing, and if we can have support for that work, I think it's a way for us to make the connections, and because this has been a hard learning process. As we've gone through this, we've had a lot of new things thrown at us that we've had to adjust to, and we really haven't had any financial support as our staff is adjusting. They do work, and then, well, no, you've got to correct that. You've got to take another route. So all that work that you've done was for nothing. And I think we can put this money to good use. Like I say, our group went ahead and we're fully staffed now. I really respect the conservation district and how they've expanded, and they recognize the need. And I'm hoping that there'll be some support. And that number may seem like a big number, a big amount of money that we're putting forward. But you know what? I was proposing 22% a year from the very beginning to get this work done. And this is an attempt to get there, but it's still not totally there. So I'm ready to continue and to keep working if we have support to get the work done. And this looks like an honest offer to move ahead that way.
Yeah, I think I felt hopeful with this potential money available as well, but I do see some some potential scary pitfalls, I guess. And I think Dean, you had articulated when we had our phone call about this topic, you'd articulated some of those potential pitfalls of like the number of projects. I don't know if you can reiterate that.
Sure, yeah, well, I mean, it's, the money is more than it's been, you know, whether it's enough is another question. And then the money still, it can be used to cover some of this exploratory conversation type of work, but that's half of a whole. The other half of the whole is to actually come up with a set of pursuable projects. So project development isn't just general project scoping, but it includes general project scoping. So, and I think this is what you're referring to, Lindsay, but if an organization says it could use $20,000 of project development funds because it could do a lot more general project scoping, there's still this need to have some specific projects come out the other end. And the key question is how many projects is that? If you get $20,000, is it 4 projects? So that it would mean on average, the $20,000 means the viable project is $5,000. It's just kind of an open question. I think that's what you're referring to, Lindsay. Okay. I also just didn't want to touch on the chat, since we do try to make people aware of comments made in the chat. And so just going back to some earlier comments, Chris Rottler had mentioned the right-of-way and the need for exploration of that as part of Lauren's project, because of the fact that there's a permit process for the Agency of Transportation. But then more recently, Lauren had asked the question, can we use project development money to pay for a landowner to talk to them? And I said, that's a really good question, and I will pursue an answer to that question from DEC. And I don't think there are any other comments that were made that we haven't covered. And maybe, Lindsay, if people are winding down on this particular discussion, I would just reiterate that it is something that, well, I see Lauren's hand is up, so I'll step.
Sorry, I just wanted to like also say these projects aren't like necessarily fun. You know, like especially as project managers, like you go out, you find a landowner who's willing to do something maybe, and then like the project managers then become just admin for a consultant typically. And it's like it's not that fun. I don't know if anybody else feels the same way, but like I get to do a lot of other really fun stuff, and this isn't that fun. I don't know that that's a critique that is useful, but just some insight.
I'll just pick up from where I was before and say that is something that has been part of the internal discussions that the RPC has had. It hasn't been a big part of it, but this idea of some of this is kind of drudge work, and like, what's the best way, you know, is there a way to address the fact that there is drudge work? And if you're an organization and you've got many options, then what do we do about that drudge work component?
I want to note that in the chat, Chris responded, this is not approved under funding policy, but I've heard lots of calls for allowing direct payments to landowners, and this is also on other people in the DEC's radar. So, a little response. Thanks, Chris. Jim.
Yeah, sorry. I think it's ironic. Well, a couple of things that we're actually paying landowners. I mean, it seems a little much in this world to, I mean, we do need interested landowners, but it just seems like paying them to talk to you is just a little excessive. I mean, I kind of would hate to see that word get out into the public that, you know, but maybe it's a good thing. I did want to say to Lauren that, I mean, I understand that project development is a big deal, and for a big project, it's time consuming. And what VTrans has done, in my experience in the past, is, you know, they'll assign somebody a project manager, and that's usually the town, if the town is the recipient of the grant. And sometimes the town hires specifically a project manager to do that work, someone knowledgeable, not necessarily a consulting firm that is charging you a lot of money, but somebody with experience and energy. And frequently, I forget the word, I hear a word, you know, someone with the motivation to make it happen. Definitely helps. I know for any town project that's being developed, having that person that's really interested in making it happen does make a difference. But sometimes you can't find that person, and you could hire somebody. But if you hire a consulting firm, you will be paying them a premium. So I certainly understand what you're saying, and I think it's getting more and more complicated to develop a project. I mean, maybe it depends on the project budget. If it's an estimated budget over $50,000 or $100,000, then it's got to be done by a more experienced, you know, type of person. And maybe the smaller projects you can do.
I think Joe was just talking about VTrans type projects. Is that right, Jim? You were referring to? With municipal project managers?
Well, I'm saying, what did you say, Dean? I can't hear you.
Are you, I think you are referring to VTrans funded projects and the role
Yeah,
of
I'm
the
using that as an example. That's what VTrans does.
Okay, yeah, thanks for confirming that. So I just wanted to say that from the very beginning, I have felt like DEC could learn some things from VTrans about how this whole system could have been designed. I think that they could have learned some things. One of the hats I wear when I'm not doing clean water stuff, I'm a municipal project manager for 2 projects that are VTrans funded projects. And I think there are some benefits to what Jim is saying, but I think we have to be really, really careful because there's a whole lot of other stuff that comes along with the VTrans process that, you know, I know it drives some people mad. So that we just have to be careful what we wish for, because it could go too far.
Right, I would agree. I think DEC is much more receptive on right-of-way issues and land ownership issues, and you know, don't require, you know, as you know, assessments of property, appraisals rather, and you know, it's a much more acceptable process, and you know, it isn't held up in forever, and you know, it's not complicated, not as complicated, but.
I have a question about, you know, projects that are on public land, especially towns, municipal properties, and whether people think that there's a better opportunity to get agreement. And one example is I'm actually, so Dean and I have talked with St. Albans Town about the Basin 5 planning process, and that was a lot of fun, and I felt that there was room to talk with them about projects in the future. And then we'll talk with Swanton next week, and Heidi, who's the town's, the village's manager, I forget. But anyway, she said to me that one issue with stormwater is that all of their stormwater is piped, and they'd like to address stormwater on their property, but that's an issue. So one that they are interested in addressing it, I think, is indicates to me that maybe we just need to sit down and think about other opportunities where there's going to be, people are going to say yes, and limit it then to that. But I don't know if you guys have heard much about towns. I know Richford was interested in working with us for those projects, but we weren't able to. We did what we could, but there were other barriers.
Kent?
Yeah, Karen, I've got experience working with towns, and the big problem that I've run into is the constant turnover, especially on select boards. And it's like you've got to do a whole educational effort every year. If you're lucky enough to have a road foreman or a good town administrator that stick around for a period of time, you may have a little continuity there. But just with the way that town government works, there's so much turnover that it's a real challenge to have a long-term relationship.
Yep.
Especially without some of that flexible funding you're talking about, Kent, where you get to go and I'm going to meet with this select board again.
So, you know, that can be funded through the Technical Basin Support Grant, where you just educate, you do, you know, put all your hours into education and outreach to talk to organizations or people about water quality issues in general, but leave the door open to, oh, I'd like to do something. And then at least you mark them off for, okay, when we can develop a proposal for a project development, where you then go back to those people to develop a project. So I think that there's money and you just have to organize it in a certain way, but please let me know if that's not the case.
Well, that's really good to hear, because I think Bridget has got 4 appearances just for this summer with 4 different select boards. So that's really good news.
Lauren?
I think I agree that the tactical basin planning grants can be used for that. And at least my organization is capped at $30,000 a year for tactical basin planning. And we have so many things we want to do with tactical basin planning that it's just, that's not like, that's half of a position maybe. And so it's just, there's not enough money in that pot.
I've also received some pushback with using my tactical basin plan dollars for, you know, I mean, I certainly have used them that way and I appreciate that they are there, but you know, it's like, well, who's talking to which organization and who's talking to which town? So that's just additional time to be like, I'm going to check in with our partner organizations and make sure they're not talking to this town about this topic. So an imperfect system, but very useful.
And it can be improved.
Yeah.
So if we want to sit down, yeah, and really talk about how do you find projects, and let's do a train of resources and say, this is what we would do here, this is what we would do there.
Yeah, because all of us have time to do that.
No, right. But it's just like this discussion.
Yeah, no, it's great. I would love
helping
to set up systems that work, but I can't even set up my internal systems that work because capacity.
Yeah.
We're all strapped, whether you're a watershed organization or a DEC staffer, everybody has too much on our plate. And I think that maybe will get us back to talking about capacity. Is that something we want to add, or do we want to close the discussion about this potential extra funding source?
Can I jump into the conversation just as a big picture perspective? This is a really great conversation. I've been really happy that I chose to join this particular meeting and be a fly on the wall for it. From the big picture perspective, you know, one of the comments that stuck out to me is like, not every project's a phosphorus project. I think, Lauren, you made a comment similar to that. Duly noted. That's why we have enhancement grants. You know, as you all know, we have a TMDL that we're working within, and this is a very important priority for the EPA. And as a result, it's a very important priority for the state and for DEC. to focus on reducing our phosphorus loading. So from a big picture perspective, the money is going to continue to flow to focus on phosphorus. And if you pay attention to the amount of money that Dean and Northwest RPC is managing, it's a lot. And just, you know, there's going to be, there's just a need to get more work done in the basin. And I hear the various pressures, and I want to respond and be thinking creatively about these different dynamics. I'm very sympathetic to the growth pressures and the lack of capacity support, and I'm a big advocate for that. But the observation I'm having is the train isn't going to stop. Like, this is going to keep coming with only more pressure to do more. So just throwing that out on the table for consideration.
Lauren.
Hey, Chris, I just want to say I like hugely respect the work that is being done and all of this, but just that comment that the train's not going to stop rolling, it is if none of us get projects.
Yeah.
And that's the task of all of our organizations, and it's not feeling like a good process.
So my point is if you're like, the system right now is trying to work with the groups that exist in the basin to find projects. But if you're at capacity and if you're focused elsewhere on other priorities, Dean is going to need to start thinking about hiring staff to fill the gaps. I'll just put it bluntly.
Gotcha.
Like
that makes sense.
Makes sense? Yeah. And I've heard feedback that we want to prioritize giving this money to watershed groups and conservation districts and others. And I would prefer to do that too. I'd rather build your capacity than build Dean's capacity to do projects in-house, because that's what we've heard through the whole system. So to the extent, and that's no ding on Dean, I think that's what Dean wants too. I think it's valuable to be thinking about that big picture dynamic of what happens if Dean is sitting on $6 or $8 million or $10 million and projects aren't getting done.
Lauren.
Follow-up point. We've talked over the past several years about a public participation policy that has never come to fruition. Nobody knows about this money.
Ted?
Yeah, I'm gonna echo, hold on, sorry, I'm jumping in late. I was out in the field where there's no self-connection and had to drive down to here. So, and I'm just jumping in, and Chris, I haven't met you yet. I'm Ted Siddell with the Orleans County Conservation District. So one of the things we brought up at the other BWQ in the next basin over was, where's the advertising campaign? Where's the public support for this? Because this is, if we're beating on doors and farms to get this money spent, but if there's a public campaign to help generate a groundswell of support across our basins, that might go a little bit smoother on our end of trying to drum up support for this too. I think Lauren mentioned that, like, where's the advertising? But that's one thing that I would like to see some of that money spent on, is a real outreach campaign where I hear it on VPR when I'm driving out into the field in the morning. Anyways, that was my piece. I hope I didn't jump in and totally derail whatever conversation was going on, but I caught enough to think I'm on the right.
Perfect timing, Ted. Go ahead.
I have a slide that I was going to show in a couple of minutes, a mention of the public participation plan. So thank you, Lauren. I don't know that I will say too much at this second, but it's on the list I had created of future meeting topics. And so I guess I'll just address it now. For people who were whose memories could be refreshed, the Act 76 process says that the Brooks and the Quist need to have a public participation policy. And the irony is that we're supposed to have one right off the bat. And so it's kind of crazy to create a public participation policy with a new organization. So the one that was created was an interim one. To the group's credit, some people said, hey, we need to expand this and make a new one. And so work was done. Ideas sort of run up the flagpole. And because the Regional Planning Commission had similar ideas, the request was made, hey, Basin Council, can you put the idea on hold until the Regional Planning Commission works on a public participation plan? And what I can tell you is that yesterday was the deadline for people on the staff to get comments to the person who's been wrapping that up. So I'm daring to say that it may be done soon. I think the public participation plan that the book is waiting to be completed before we do the next thing could be done. It could be done soon. That's the first thing. That's the good news. The not as good news is that the public participation plan is, and I don't want to seem like I'm getting into the weeds too much, but the public participation plan, or what for us is a policy, is not what I think people need, and that is a communications plan. It's the actual, what's the message going to be, where's it going to be printed, and how will we reach people? And that's a follow-up activity. And when I first started, that was one of the first questions that I had asked DEC. I said, where's DEC's communications plan for this initiative? Because it seemed like a very logical thing to flow from all of the investment that's being made. And I didn't get an answer really for a long, long time until the answer finally came down maybe 6 or 8 months ago. And it was that DEC is not going to do it. So it is going to be up to the basins somehow if there is going to be a communications effort. And I know that we've touched on this conversation when the committee that was created to work on this was doing so over a year ago. But it's going to come back and we'll have to confront it and we'll have to figure out, okay, what dollars could be spent and how are they going to be spent to do the messaging to get the word out to make people aware, because that's somewhat distinct from the plan as it's been written in the policy, because it has more to do with other things. Anyway, I'll stop and let Lauren ask a follow-up.
I guess I'm very glad it's almost ready. I'm pretty sad that it took this long and isn't even what we want. I think just the recognition, like even if me, Lindsay, and Kent, and Dean, and Ted, who I think are potentially the only folks who have brought projects to this BWQ, even if we were managing 10 or 12 projects each, we still wouldn't be spending this money. Like there needs to be development of more project managers. Big picture as well.
Well, I understand Northwest RPC is hiring.
Right, but again, that's one more person, like who likely doesn't have any contacts with anyone in the region, potentially. I think it's just like the scale of what needs to happen in the Missisquoi Basin. It needs to be understood that like more people need to be able to understand this process.
Understood. And I would say I agree. There's like, you don't need one weapon, you need 17 or tools. You need 17 tools, not one. I'd say the development, you need capacity support money and you need more than you're getting. The development, the opportunity presented by the development funding is just one other tool. So if you're already doing development and you can take some of that money from the QUISP and pay some of that staff time, maybe it frees up some of your budget. Maybe there's 20 grand in development money, development work you're already doing. You get some of the development money, maybe you can increase it. Maybe you can increase your development a little bit and you free up some of your own budget that you're ordinarily spending on that. And then you spread it, there's 5 organizations that do that. There's an opportunity there that provides some help. It's not a solution for everything, but it's a tool. So hoping, that the development opportunity is one part of the solution.
Jim?
But I hear you. I hear you.
I just, I don't know. I have a couple of things. Perhaps it's a complaint about DEC, but I don't understand. As an employee a long time ago, we spent a lot of money over 10 years developing stormwater plans, and now DEC has set this target of $7,000 a pound, which is just not very practical for urban areas. And I think we knew years ago, a long time ago, through the basin program, that phosphorus removal in an urban area was going to be more expensive than it was in an ag area. And I know that projects that were implemented never got to the threshold level that DEC is now set for, dollars per pound, like 7,000. It's just not practical. So I don't know, what they're thinking, Chris. I don't know what's going on with the management there. I mean, the only thing you could practically do with stormwater would be to disconnect it. You could make sure that roofs are draining onto the lawn, or they're fairly inexpensive fixes but there's not that many that you could do. So I just wonder why we did all this planning on all these projects, and they're all on the books, and there were cost estimates and 30% designs, and then nothing's been, not nothing, but no, most of those projects don't qualify for funding because, like Lauren said, they don't meet the, they're not cost effective. But here we're going to spend more money on planning. It just doesn't make a lot of sense to me.
Dean, can I jump in on that, or is that all right?
Sure. Yeah, go ahead.
That $7,000 is an aggregate number across different project types. The cost rate methodology was set actually using historical data, including the historical stormwater numbers and costs. And the figure that was developed was, it's proportional for the target for each basin. Well, for the entire basin, sorry. So I don't know what the percentages are, and I wasn't involved directly. I just have the basic understanding of how it works. But if your forestry target's 20%, your stormwater target's 20%, and you go down the line, the cost of those projects historically were looked at, brought to the table, and then that's how we came up with the average efficiency score. That's across all project types. I think you should be looking at a higher number for stormwater projects. Even if you raised it to $20,000 or $25,000 per kilogram, though, I agree with you, it might be a little low. And I would say that the cost rate methodology that we have on the books is flawed in a few areas. The one that's the most obvious to me is inflation. We're relying on data that's 2 to 6 years old. I don't know how old the data is. So it doesn't account for the 10, 14% inflation we've seen year over year over the last 2 to 3 years, at the very least, not to mention other problems. So I agree there's problems with cost rate methodology, but to say that we didn't look at stormwaters, it's not accurate. We looked at all those project numbers, and that's what was fed into the system. It's just that there's other project types in there that changed the math. But if you're more interested in that, we could definitely have Ben come in and explain it more, if that's more helpful.
I don't need to wait for Ben to tell you that the number, Jim, that you mentioned, 7,000 for stormwater projects is just, it's not anywhere close to what the Missisquoi number is. Using old data, the average per kilogram cost across all types is something like $15,000 a kilogram. And that takes into account that some of them will be $5,000 a kilogram projects, and some of them will be more like $50,000 a kilogram. And I haven't pulled up the table for it's in that methodology report that Chris mentioned. But the money that comes in does recognize that some of it will have to be spent on these, or was with the expectation that some would be spent on stormwater projects, and they would have a much higher cost. And I don't remember if it was $40,000 average or $45,000, but it's more like that than $7,000. Although Chris's last comment about inflation and the flaws in the methodology, I would say it's very much on point, because the cost of doing projects since that study was done and all the earlier projects were done, it's really increased with COVID and steel prices and like all of that stuff that was happening over the last 5 years would come into play. So that $40,000 or $45,000 number should be even higher. But I just want to make it clear, somebody has a good stormwater project and it costs a lot per kilogram. In a sense, the rules of the game, or the lens that we look at in evaluating it as staff and saying it to you, we would say it's high, but it's not high for a stormwater project.
Go ahead, Barry.
Just to get back to the public participation, it sounds like there's a level of frustration that people think that not a lot of people know about this money. Do we need an approved public participation plan to basically put out a bunch of front porch forum ads in all of our regions about the next round of funding? And if we don't, is that something that people think is helpful or valuable?
I guess my thoughts is that it needs to be a bit more comprehensive than just, hey, there's a round of funding. It needs to be, hey, DEC needs volunteers to give up land to do projects, and you need to have a relationship with these people. And I think that's a more, like, front porch forum, yes, a great place to start and maybe start getting the word out. But I think we need like a robust communications plan.
Dean?
Yeah, I just wanted to touch on one of the points that Chris made in the chat about spending or paying reimburse being counter to the funding policy. I'm going to go back and look at the policy to confirm, because my hunch is that it's not that it's prohibited by the policy, it's just not explicitly authorized by the policy. And I'm basing that comment on a conversation, or at least a meeting that Neil came in when I began my soapboxing about doing this. And he expressed some interest or willingness, and it wasn't an outright rejection. So I would say that if this idea is important, then it's one that will need to be communicated. And the funding policy is in the works. It's being worked on, the next iteration of it. I understand that it's supposed to be done sometime in 2024. So I wasn't able to get a clearer number, but that may be a message the BWQ wants to send to the people that are updating the funding policy.
Dean, so this is a bit of a tangent, but I got the impression from what you said a little while back that the communications plan will fall to you. Has there been internal discussion? And
so what had happened was that we have someone who thought they were going to work on it and they weren't able to, and it was passed to another person, and that person has been doing a lot of work on it over the last several months. We had an in-person staff meeting where a presentation was made. That wasn't that long ago, and comments were due, like I said, yesterday. And I've been trying to get a follow-up answer, which is, were there comments? And if there weren't many comments, then what's happening next, so that I could then tell you specifically, okay, it's going to be presented to the RPC board at the July meeting or something like that, so that it could then be, we'd know it's done. But then back to Barry's earlier question, personally, I don't think we need that document in order to do front porch form ads. But like Lauren said, it's not just front porch form ads that is the need.
Right, and that's actually what I'm asking about, like not the public participation policy, but do you as the QUISP have any sense of, we should have a communication plan, we should have an outreach plan, we should develop materials that are standardized? Is there any thought that the QUISP might do that?
There isn't a specific budget line for it, but I've been talking about it for a while. And I think that the thinking, I think what Barry's alluding to is that there's been some uncertainty about making that step until this public participation plan was done. And I see a positive in the completion of the plan, because okay, we can then say, okay, the plan is done. Can we do the next thing? And I'll say the draft of the public participation plan I saw has a outline for a communications plan in it. Why? Because I said there should be one, because that's like a step along the way. And I don't know if it gets adopted in the format that it's in, if that will mean that, okay, we can fill in a couple of the blanks in that and then just go to the next step. We have the communications plan. Now let's implement the communications plan with a line in the budget.
Great, thank you. I do want to just note that Chris put in the chat, I invite you all to work together on both comments to the funding policy, including allowing direct payments to landowners should you agree, and then also on a communication strategy within the basin. I really like hearing you engage on this discussion. Barry and Lauren, are yours legacy raised hands? So then
Yes,
Kent.
sorry.
Right. Kent, go ahead.
Okay, thank you. I'm going to get off that subject a little bit and get back to the beginning. I remember 4 years ago when we were being introduced to the process, that we were being told that this was going to be a simplified process. It was going to be more efficient. It was going to be more flexible, and we were going to be able to get money out the door more quickly and more easily. I'm wondering, as you're looking at these target formulations and how are we going to spend the money, and we're going to put more money at this, is that being balanced with trying to find ways to simplify the process to make it something that watershed groups can navigate more easily without having to add a lot more hours and a lot more staff time? Or are we just past that and just moving right along, and we're not thinking in those terms anymore?
Sounds like a question to me. I'm not sure I ever promised this would be more efficient. I would say it was definitely a goal. One of the areas where you might not see the efficiency is, the DEC back 4 years ago was a real bottleneck getting grant agreements through. Like, just, if you know what our grant process was or what it is, it's very inefficient. And so one of the things that has been removed is the Bulletin 3 and Bulletin 3.5 and Bulletin 5 requirements are not required, despite how much ink has been spilled in guidance. We've actually removed some of the requirements, and this is the big one. QUISP are not subject to Bulletins 3.5 or 5 in their procurement policies. So there are a few procurement requirements and there are hoops to jump through, no doubt. But a lot has been removed that normally would have to be accommodated if you were directly working with the state. Is efficiency important? It absolutely is important. I would say, though, by design, the way the law was written, creating 7 new organizations versus 1 is arguably, that's just inefficient. And having basin water quality councils is also arguably inefficient. We didn't have a basin water quality council at DEC when we did it. So there have been some gains and there's been some changes that are less efficient. I think the biggest strength of the system is that it's local and it's community-based and there's an opportunity for input. So to the extent that you're able to see priorities and bring them to the council, and it can be your council, it can be your regional partner working on these solutions and you're working together, that's an improvement. It's not necessarily efficient, but I think it is a step forward in effectiveness and community-based, priority setting. But I am also a big fan of process improvement. So to the extent that, and I will just reiterate what I said in the chat, should you see opportunities for improvement, I'm all ears, we're all ears. So there are things we can control and there are things we can't control. I know I'm here with Karen as the face of DEC. I'm one person in a team of 15 we work with that, I can't control all of their points of view and the dynamic and where we land on certain issues, but I am definitely an advocate for making things better. So to the extent that you have feedback, especially on things that are low-hanging fruit or things that are actionable, even if you don't think it's actionable, you just want to express things that you think would be opportunities to make things better, please share with Dean or share with me directly. Or with Karen, happy to receive it. And, if I can't give you a yes, I can at least explain why. But there are currently things I'm working on as well to make things better. It just doesn't get to be public until the decision is made. But there are things happening as we speak to make things better and more efficient.
And I just add, definitely the process needs to be improved. We need to provide more resources to you guys and support. And there just isn't, we're not having the conversation. Ken had some great comments and Lindsay, and we just need to sit down and hash through it. And I know we don't have a lot of time, but that's what we could use the book for. Just put some time aside and say, let's just talk through how it takes your staff so much time to get the right project, and why do they spend time on projects that they shouldn't be pursuing. And there isn't room for that discussion unless you set the time aside for it and facilitate it.
I agree there should be time set aside for this. I'm still, I guess, unclear what the BWQ is for, because it sounds like that's a conversation to happen with project managers, and the BWQ is supposed to be people voting on projects.
Mm-hmm.
It is supposed to be different things, is my understanding. And if that's wrong, that would be helpful information to have.
There is a role in statute there's a role that statute calls out for the BWQ in basin planning. The most direct thing that you're involved with is voting on projects. I think Basin Water Quality Council 2.0 is definitely engagement in the basin planning process. That's still, I've used this analogy just this morning. We're still in the toddler phase of this whole endeavor, and it's clumsy, and we're spilling our sippy cups, and lots of things are awkward. So things will change, and some of those changes will hopefully be for the better. But yeah, there is a role for working together on setting priorities for the basin and working with Karen on the basin planning process. Among other things among other valuable perspectives and expertise you bring to the table, of course.
Tim?
Sorry, Dean, when you asked about how to do the outreach, I'll just mention an example. I was surprised. I'm on the Conservation Commission in my town, and members of the commission partnered with the Solid Waste District on a recycling workshop just to invite the public to learn more about recycling. And it seems kind of maybe mundane or old hat, but it really was a innovative action by the Conservation Commission to do that. And the Solid Waste District was able to answer most of the questions they had, and the public did attend it. And it sort of, passed the workload from the Water Quality Council to the Conservation Commission, and the Conservation Commission was motivated to do it. I think maybe that's because we had new Conservation Commission members. We had new blood, but it was successful. I mean, I guess the only problem with it was just as spring started, like a green up. It could have been in the winter when people had more time on their hands, but basically they sort of did the job of bringing the people together, and then the Solid Waste District did all the teaching, and it seemed to have been pretty successful.
Yeah, thanks, Jim. I'm not sure I asked the question you thought I asked, but I mean, I definitely have seen those kinds of coordinated complementary activities taking place between organizations. I've seen them here in this basin where, there's constant reinforcing of messaging and trying to get at people, even if they're not direct target, they may bring people in. So yeah, I definitely get that. I would just mention that Karen had put a comment in the chat so people know. She said could have process improvement meetings at the basin regional meetings. And Karen, I think you were referring to the tactical basin plan quarterly meetings. When you say basin regional meetings, not basin council meetings, but maybe.
Yeah, and also we, with the tactical basin plan, the meetings where we have the topic-based meetings, we could create something there that everybody goes to. Yeah, I know you all know already what you want to do, but we may decide that's more important than other stuff. So.
Yeah, I don't want to shut down discussion. I just want to remind people of the time. It's 20 minutes to what would be the scheduled end. There are some more agenda topics. One is, I think, reasonably deserving of time, and the other one will be also. And it also could relate or illustrate Chris's remark about process improvement. So I don't know if you would be ready to move things on.
Yeah, I was thinking of calling for sort of last comments. I do want to just respond to Jim's comment about we love our conservation commissions. We've got 2 members of conservation commissions on screen with us, and we don't have enough conservation commissions in our region. The region that Ted and I operate in within the Missisquoi Basin, New Orleans County has 0. So they are great, but maybe some of this funding could be to support creation of more groups like that will push these projects forward. Any sort of wrap-up comments that other folks want to share as we move on from this varied octopus of a conversation that's been really great? And Chris says, apologies if he helped derail the agenda. I don't think you did at all. It was good discussion. And I think Dean and Kent and I all sort of knew when we first looked at the draft agenda that Dean put together, it was going to be a weighty chunk of time. Lauren just wants to note she has to switch to her phone. So that's why there's suddenly 2 of her on screen. Any final thoughts before we move on to solicitation and appointment of BWQC members and alternates? Okay, thanks for the discussion, and I'm sure more to come.
Okay, well, this is the agenda item, maybe not the best or most accurate description, but There was some information about this in the packet. I've made some slides that might make things a little bit clearer. And I'll editorialize a tiny bit because in terms of process improvement, this is an area where I think there could be some process improvement. The Act 76 rules language governing this issue simply set up how people would be appointed to serve on the council. And it said that the chair and the vice chair would need to be elected and re-elected. You don't install someone and they're in that position for life. And so what's come out in guidance is that the basin, and so it's not in rule, but it's in DEC guidance, so it's essentially their policy. They establish that members of the council, your terms run out after 2 years. And so some of you, many of you have received emails from me because we're playing catch up. The guidance says that members have to be reappointed, their terms end after 2 years. And it's supposed to be done in a manner that's similar to or the same as what was done originally. And it even said, and this was all created after the Basin Council was formed. And when the language was being developed, I think our comment was just put something like, unless this issue is addressed in a set of bylaws for a Basin Council, then you can go on and say, so that whatever the Basin Council saw was the best approach for itself, it could put in its bylaws, but we didn't end up with that language. But the short of it is that I'm going through this process with many of you, well, with all of you, to establish your interest in continuing because the guidance says that we have to reappoint you every 2 years. It lays out this process, which is all new to us, that we should have known this a while ago, 4 months before July, basically. People should have known, raise your hand and let Dean know if you're going to continue, and then you'd find out who doesn't want to continue and we'd fill those gaps. After a month, so within 3 months prior to the start of the fiscal year, I would then tell A&R, oh, we have half of our board that's going to change, and we're going to have to fill those slots, and we have to work with the process and fill those slots. So anyway, I'm going to rely more on this chart. So what the guidance document says we should have done is that in March, all of you should have informed the CLISP whether or not you wanted to serve. And we would bring in groups like WOV and the conservation districts to start talking about, well, what do we do about the vacancies? And then in April, the partners would, figure out who's going to fill this position. And then that would allow the CLISP to tell DEC, okay, here's who's coming back, and here's who's not coming back, and here's who's going to replace them, or we're not sure who's going to replace them. And then by May, we're required by the guidance to have an open process. So even though the timetable says we would have that done 3 months before the fiscal year, we're still supposed to make people aware of this and do an open process so they could be involved. That would mean that by June, everybody knows that the terms are going to turn over, and then come July or August, we'd have our annual meetings, and returning members would be renewed. Anybody who's new would be seated for the first time. Oh, and by the way, same thing applies to alternates. Their seats run out after 2 years, and they would need to be renewed or seated. And this all happens in the same meeting that we would do our annual elections. And then maybe, the next meeting, we would fill any gaps. So that's what the process is according to the guidance. The process that's unfolding is that, hey, everybody was caught off guard. And so in May, I'm reaching out to you and saying, do you want to stay on? In the last few days, we're contacting Love, we're contacting you, and we're saying, hey, do you want to play your role in filling these gaps and figuring it out? So we need to know who's returning, who might replace them. And what about any vacancies? And what I can tell you is that, coming into middle of June, we've already started putting things on our website and blasting mails and newsletter articles, and we'll do Facebook posts because we need to be able to show we're doing an open process. Then we're going to send information along. So we have to, stay in touch with the webs of the world and basically get together on the same page with who's going to be taking over positions and who's going to be staying on, so that by late June, we can give this report to DEC. We can look at whoever's been identified as an alternate, and we would consider that adequate notice because we're supposed to provide adequate notice. And so this is all boiling down to, come July, or in the case of this group in August, we will be repeating pretty much what we did when we created the QUISP, and that is, you'll be seated if you're a rep, or you'll be renewed if you're an existing rep, and with alternates, we will recognize you as alternates. This is complicated, frankly, and a process improvement would be to make it simpler. This chart that I won't describe is basically what is written into the rule. And it was written into the rule as what needs to happen the first time. So I'm not going to complain about it too much since we did it in the first time. I'm not sure that we would need to do it every succeeding time, or at least not every 2 years, maybe every 3 years or every 4 years or something like that. Anyway, this is intended to be sort of a summary slide. This is the alternates process is basically like the process for regular reps. It's in the hands of the organizations that are called appointing entities. That's the conservation districts, the regional planning commission. Anyway, and my point here is the last one. Unless DEC guidance changes, we just have to remember to start this process earlier in 2026, and maybe like in January or February, so that we have as much robust, open, transparent process as it seems to be desired. And I'm not saying it's not a good thing, but it's a complicated thing. We know most of you, Ben and most of you are coming back. There will be some switches. This is an updated table. I'm going to move on and just say that if you want it, I'll send it out. And I'm going to stop talking then, just let people ask questions. And if there are no questions, then I would reiterate that I apologize for the emails, but this system does require that groups within the basin who are of the same type have a consensus about who's. So it's really supposed to come from those groups of entities to say, okay, here's who we think should be the conservation district reps in this basin. And it's less supposed to be me assembling it, and it should be more you folks in that sector saying to me, here's who we propose, and let DEC know. And maybe that does it. Maybe I've put that issue to bed.
I think your taking us through that process was clear, and I don't have any questions. I do think it's ridiculously overcomplicated, but that's not unusual in this era. So I suspect others feel the same about it being, about your narrative being good enough anyway. Thanks, Dean. So the next topic is annual meeting.
Touching on this, I had a note in the package and wanted to just make clear that we're on a schedule where the next meeting would be in August. There is supposed to be an election. The rules or the bylaws say that if you don't feel the need for creating a nominating committee, you decide that now. And I think that if the chair and the vice chair are willing to stay in their positions, that's maybe a good sign that there doesn't need to be a nominating committee. And if people are on that wavelength, then someone should just make a motion, and that motion should be voted on so that Lindsay would know whether or not she needs to appoint a nominating committee.
Great. I'm willing to stay on as chair. Kent, are you willing to stay on as vice chair? Yes. So I would love to have a motion from someone that we don't need to create a nominating committee. Looks like Sarah is motioning. Is there
I move that we keep our officers and we do not need a nominating committee.
Thank you, Sarah. Is there a second?
Second it.
Yeah.
If I could do the object, I guess I'm a little bit hesitant because it almost sounds like that motion is making the election today. I just want to be sure that there's an understanding that it's yes, there will be a chair and a vice chair, but the election still is supposed to happen after the turn of the year. I just want to make sure that that's what people are doing. It's just that there won't be a nominating committee and the election will happen in August. Yeah, period.
Great. Sarah, do you mind restating the motion just about the no nominating committee?
I move that we send Lindsay as chair and Kent as vice chair as the slate of officers to be voted on at the annual meeting, and that we do not need a nominating committee.
Action.
Okay.
Second.
Nominated by Sarah, seconded by Dan. All in favor of using the existing slate and not needing, thereby not needing a nominating committee. I've got Beth, Lindsay, Sarah, Dan, Barry, Dave, and Lauren. All right.
Chairman, I am abstaining.
All right. Kent abstained. I suppose I should have abstained as well as that part of that slate.
Oh.
Either way, motion carried. Okay, S55.
Yeah, this is related to the larger topic of future meetings. The annual meeting will be an in-person meeting or a hybrid meeting, I should say. The last year we did it at the Emergency Services Building in Enosburg. I'm thinking that might be a location to seriously consider. Again, I'll talk with you and Kent and Lindsay a little bit more, but that is located in the basin and I think works. But we were able to offer it as a hybrid meeting, and if the people that couldn't travel, they could participate remotely, and that would be possible in that meeting space. Going forward, there is a question about whether or not basin councils will have to conduct hybrid meetings always, or at least always have a location, a physical location where people could assemble. We've been able to do all hybrid meetings as a result of a law that was passed during COVID and then was extended. There's a new law that was signed by the governor a few days ago. This is called S55. It takes effect in July. And it sets a new set of rules. We do a lot of the things already, so there's no sweat there. It's just there's going to be some discussion about whether or not basin councils are in a particular category that is eligible for Zoom-only meetings. And we're going to probably need to get legal opinion on that, or someone will. But anyway, I just want people to know it's all coming in the form of this bill S55, now law, and it hinges on the definition of advisory body. And anyway, I think that's all that I really need to say, other than in the packet, it says advisory bodies can meet electronically without a physical location. If you don't qualify as an advisory body, then we'll begin having a physical location probably at the RPC offices going forward. I don't know that things will change much, but. And if you're ready to head for the exits, future meeting topics that I had put together. I don't know if there are any special topics for discussion at the annual meeting. More meaty discussion of this project development funding issue may be something to consider. I also wanted to mention that Chris Smith of Fish and Wildlife Service has offered to come and talk at some point about his work and the funding that he could bring. It's the kind of money that could be used for projects that cost a lot of money and that without outside funding might not be attractive for QUIS funds, but with outside money could be. And then also I had put on this slide public participation plan. So those are possible future topics, not necessarily. If anybody has anything that they would want to suggest, please let me know. And then, as I mentioned, the funding rounds coming up. Next one, August 14, with the deadline of September 17, and the one after that, December 18th. Unless the decision is made to do something like end project rounds and simply go to open applications. And I'll just say that one reason why we do things the way we do them is because guidance said, or the rules said, we have to adopt a schedule every year. Well, I guess we could always have a schedule that says you can apply at any time. But we haven't done that yet, but maybe that's a step we will take.
Great. Thank you, Dean, as ever, for being very organized and keeping us compliant and on track. Does anyone have any final closing thoughts or want to weigh in on some of those topic suggestions? Go ahead, Ken.
I missed it. When's our next meeting?
It's going to be
The date of the next meeting is
7th.
did you say August 7th? That sounds right.
Yeah.
August 7th. Okay. Thank you.
Right. If there's no
Meeting?
what, Beth? Sorry, I
Is
said
August 7th the annual meeting, or is that not till September?
no, that'll be our annual meeting.
August 7th will be the annual meeting.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
All right. If there's no other closing thoughts or questions, then I'll seek a motion to adjourn today's meeting right on time. Nobody wants to leave? Oh, Sarah's motioning.
I second.
Ed seconding. All right. All in favor? Everybody, Beth, Lindsay, Lauren, Kent, Sarah, Dan, we're all out of here.
Thank you all very much. I appreciate it.
Thanks, everybody. Have a good rest of your day.